Hello everyone, and welcome to my 90-day Fiance official channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Pedro Jimeno from the family Chantel has insulted Chantel Everett and her family on the television countless times, but these 10 incidents are the worst. Pedro from the Dominican Republic contacted Chantel through a mutual friend while Chantel was looking for a Spanish tutor. Pedro used to work as a language tutor back then. Chantel had gone to meet him and fallen in love with Pedro. He proposed to Chantel on her third trip to the DR, but Chantel lied to her parents and never told them she was engaged. Chantel was at fault for her family's dislike of Pedro since she had lied about why Pedro was in the US after his K-1 visa was accepted. Chantel and Pedro said that he was in America on a student visa. Ever since then, Chantel's parents were afraid he was trouble. Chantel's parents accused Pedro of marrying their daughter to gain a green card. Meanwhile, Pedro and his family treated Chantel horribly. Pedro did little to influence their mind. Pedro stayed married to Chantel for almost 7 years. Pedro only broke up with Chantel once he became a US citizen. Getting a green card could have been tough for Pedro if he had broken up earlier. As years passed, and he had to pretend his love for Chantel, he became more and more irritated towards her. He resumed acting like he was single till he filed for divorce in May 2022. Karema and Nicole Jimeno were childhood friends. They grew up together in the Dominican Republic, and Karema developed a great infatuation on her friend's elder brother. Karema made a significant controversy in the lives of Pedro and Chantel during Happily Ever After. Season 4. Chantel was in Atlanta at the time and Pedro had gone to his native country for some time. He went out with his mates and consumed some 10 shots of alcohol. Pedro pulled off his wedding band and dropped it at the bottom of a drink. Pedro got extremely intimate with Karema on the dance floor. She stated she was interested in him. Karema didn't have much hope for Pedro and Chantel's relationship. She had apparently foretold their breakup years ago. When Chantel saw the video, she thought it was some random woman Pedro was dancing with. Chantel learned Karema was a friend of Nicole's who wanted to date Pedro when Nicole showed Chantel the complete video. Chantel intended to get away of all she had shared with Pedro in her past, and it included their house. Chantel addressed a realtor about selling the house where she lived with Pedro and met face-to-face with her boyfriend 9 months after their breakup. Chantel had scheduled a yard sale to get rid of the junk in the house. She got to keep everything after their divorce and didn't want to do anything with Pedro's possessions. Pedro had left behind some of his cherished items, including his gardening tools and his gaming chair. Pedro used to spend more time at his gaming station than with Chantel. He was often playing video games with his headphones on, pretending not to hear Chantel. When he did start having a busy social life, he didn't include Chantel. Pedro's stupid *** chair went to the highest bidder. Karen Everett sold it for $1. When Pedro returned to the house and found out his beloved chair was missing, he felt quite distressed. He let Chantel know he wasn't thrilled that she had sold it. Pedro was never this concerned about rescuing his own marriage. Chantel and Pedro were fighting all the time in the Family Chantel Season 4 as they inched closer to their split. Chantel was not satisfied with Pedro working more nights than normal and noted these nights were increasing more common and later. He told Chantel that was none of her concern. However, Pedro was unpleasant and entitled. When Pedro returned, he discovered that Chantel had the day off but still hadn't done the cleaning, the grocery shopping, or the laundry, despite promising him. Chantel informed Pedro she was tired. Pedro pointed out Chantel worked 3 days and yet wasn't making herself useful at home in her downtime. He didn't care that Chantel was working 12 hours a day back-to-back for 3 days. When she tried to rest on her 4th day, Pedro would nag her and label her lazy. Pedro was acting like he was the only one who worked and that no one worked as hard as him. Pedro thought Chantel used to work more harder previously, as they were grinding together, but grew apart after she stopped. "I'm sick of your lazy
Pedro and his
*****.
supervisor,
Laura
he
had grown
informed
pretty
her.
close during this tough phase of his marriage to Chantel. Pedro was even suspected of cheating on Chantel with his employer. In August 2022, Pedro was photographed vacationing with Laura and Chantel Baranahia and other of their younger co-workers. Pedro's intentions were questioned because he didn't like Chantel taking trips, but here, he was vacationing with his boss. A different snapshot in September 2022 showed Pedro standing with his employer, with his hand around her waist. Pedro was disgraced by the family Chantel viewers who suspected Pedro was cheating. A private investigator that Karen had engaged also hinted that Pedro was close to his boss. However, Pedro is a user who could have been utilizing even Laura to reach to the top. His thoughts of friendship for his boss may have been made up. He persuaded Chantel into bringing him to the US and also exploited his charming nature to make these women fall for him, including Laura, and even Karema, who he hoped to date after he divorced Chantel. Chantel was incredibly unhappy when she found out that she couldn't graduate from her nursing college after years of hard work, and despite passing all her tests. Chantel had sat Pedro down to tell him that she had passed all her classes, but the bad news was she couldn't graduate since her test average was 3 points off. Chantel was requested to apply for the next semester after she had practiced stepping across the stage and had even acquired her sash. Pedro was perplexed, but instead of consoling his wife, he lashed out at her. Pedro sat in front of a despondent Chantel, making her feel awful about not graduating, yet he did not know anything about her RN program or how difficult it was. He didn't bother listening to Chantel, who tried to explain through tears. She wanted to graduate with her pals and start their jobs together. Chantel needed a hug and warm words of encouragement from a husband who was supposed to be her cheerleader. Instead, Pedro made Chantel feel worse. Throughout their marriage, Pedro constantly finding new methods to put Chantel down. Chantel had expected Pedro to be working from home a lot as a real estate agent. However, Pedro worked from office and was gone 6 days a week. He hardly told Chantel anything about his employment, even though he was spending a lot of time there. He was making friends at work and then spending time with the same folks later by going out for drinks. Chantel was delighted that Pedro had discovered something he was passionate about, but understood that it had changed him. She felt like her husband didn't like her, and they didn't have a friendship anymore. Pedro was getting along with everyone because most of the office personnel spoke Spanish. He felt like he was finally among the kind of folks that he could vibe with. Pedro didn't comprehend that Chantel was spending her days off not doing anything and sleeping her time off because she was depressed. It was not a sign of idleness but a cry for aid. Pedro never showed any concern about why Chantel was so low all the time. Instead, he was disgusted that she was not working. He ended up creating a wider gulf between them. Their married home was one of the last things serving as a common connection between Pedro and Chantel. However, the 5-bedroom, 3.5-bathroom residence was sold in March 2023. Seeing Pedro for the first time in 9 months caused all the nasty things he'd said to her come back to Chantel. She felt like it was a mistake for her to show up to discuss the joint sale of the house with a real estate agent since Pedro had treated her so bad and evil. However, Pedro didn't share the same sentiments with Chantel. Pedro, a real estate agent himself, sought to earn a profit even when they were parting ways. Their realtor was going to give the couple a huge profit on the sale of the property, but Pedro was furious. He thought it was unfair that he couldn't sell the home himself so they could save the $25,000 commission that the agent was going to collect. Pedro found it difficult to understand that they needed a neutral third party to carry on the sale. Pedro simply had money on his mind. He was usually contemptuous of Chantel's feelings regardless. Thanks for watching, everyone. What do you think will happen next? We love hearing from you.